Now, time to say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, how are you?
Morning. Flourishing, thank you.
Excellent. Well, flourishing is good. I'm glad to hear that. A fascinating piece at the weekend, I thought, about Russia. I hadn't thought about the geographical sort of proximity of the Russian sort of border back in the day when you were working there. Only 500 miles from the English Channel. It sort of sent a bit of a chill down my back, to be honest.
Well, not technically the Russian border, but the western, the absolute far western frontier of the Soviet Empire.
Yes.
The Warsaw Pact was in the middle of Germany between Marienborn and Helmstedt, which was, let's say, 500 miles from the Channel. Now you have to travel 3 times as far to get to the Russian border, somewhere near Smolensk. And you have to go through the whole of the old Warsaw Pact countries and then through Belarus as well before you get to Russia, which is a hugely diminished country, which has given up hundreds of thousands of square miles in Central Europe and even more in Central Asia. It is also economically and politically and militarily reduced, and yet we treat it as if it was a terrible expansionist threat. What I tried to do, and of course I was immediately smeared as being some kind of apologist for the Putin despotism, which I'm not. What I tried to do was to say, what would the equivalent have been if the United States had lost the Cold War, and Moscow had treated the defeated United States as we have treated what is effectively a defeated Russia? And I explained that the equivalent would be, for instance, the detaching from the United States, which is the parallels of the detaching of Ukraine from Moscow. The detaching from the United States is the whole area seized by the United States in the 1840s from Mexico, which a lot of people believe was illegitimate. Imagine if that were to be turned into an independent nation, which was then being encouraged to join an anti-American alliance. Then also imagine that, which is another parallel, that Quebec, finally separated from Canada, joined the Soviet-run Warsaw Pact and allowed Warsaw Pact troops to be stationed right down on the border of the United States, a few hundred miles from New York City. This is actually paralleled by what's going on. There are NATO troops in Narva in Estonia, which are less than 100 miles from St. Petersburg, the second city of Russia. And the Russians find all these things quite alarming, and it doesn't matter what the internal politics of Russia are. Even if Russia were being run, as it is not, by nice, furry liberal Democrats, its government would still be deeply concerned by the endless, how shall I put it, treatment of it as a defeated nation. Now, Winston Churchill had a good motto: in defeat, defiance; in victory, magnanimity. He knew that if you defeated countries and you treated them too harshly, that in the end you would, because the world turns and extraordinary reversals of fortune take place, in the end you would create dangerous enemies. I think this is what we're doing with Russia, and the only thanks I get for pointing this out is to be smeared.
Well, isn't it interesting?
Some kind of apologist for the Putin tyranny, which it's just so stupid. Because people need to think. George Kennan, who was the head of American foreign policy towards the Soviet Union, opposed this whole policy of NATO expansion. And now I could call George Kennan some kind of subversive Soviet agent. He was at the heart of the whole policy of containment of the Soviet Union for 40 years. And I take his view. If you don't want to make enemies where it's not necessary, and this is what we do.
Yes.
And I just thought turning it around and doing a mirror image of what it would have looked like from our point of view is good, because the best way of judging your own policies is to imagine how it would feel if they were applied to you.
Yes. And I'm very much of the opinion that the expansion of the European Union was largely to blame for what trouble there was in Ukraine several years ago, because Putin, and I have some sympathy for him here, and I may be also accused of being a Putin stooge, which I'm not. You know,
wait for it to come. It's the only answer you'll generally get. You'll never get a reasoned answer. You'll just get smears.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily difficult subject to discuss without being smeared.
Well, as we found, most subjects are these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
But I mean, here's a guy who, I wouldn't say willingly, but the breakup of the Soviet Union led to all sorts of satellite states getting independence, including Chechnya, including Georgia, all of those places, South Ossetia that nobody had ever heard of. Suddenly he finds Angela Merkel making inroads into the Ukraine government, asking them if they'd like some money to join the European Union. And quite rightly, he thought, well, this is a step too far, isn't it?
Well, this is a very, very old story. It's been the policy of the German nations in Central Europe since the end of the 19th century to try and destabilize Russian rule in Ukraine. And indeed, it was something which Lenin got up to, which is why when he was in Austria-Hungary in the outbreak of the First World War, he was initially arrested as an enemy alien, which he was very quickly sprung from prison by Austrian military intelligence in Vienna as a thank you for all the work he'd done on trying to destabilize Ukraine on behalf of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And there he ended up in Zurich, where he was then hired by the German government to knock Russia out of the war by overthrowing the first democratic government Russia ever had. So the history of this is quite interesting and rather sinister, but there has always been, and in both the Peace of Brest-Litovsk in 1917, and then, of course, during the Third Reich, a huge desire among certain types of German to have control of the Ukraine, or Ukraine as it is now. And this is not a new thing. And certainly the European Union, in my view, has for many, many years been the continuation of Germany by other means. And it didn't seem to me to be much doubt that what was going on in 2014 in Kiev was a contest between those in Ukraine who wanted to remain non-aligned and those who wanted Ukraine to be aligned with NATO and the European Union. And of course, you can imagine that Russia would not be particularly keen on that any more than we would be particularly keen if it still existed on France and Germany during the Warsaw Pact. You just have to see these things from where they are. Russia hasn't got a strip of rough salt water between itself and its main enemies. It's been repeatedly invaded. Its second city, then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, was besieged, and hundreds of thousands of people died of starvation within living memory. If you go to the suburbs of Moscow at Khimki on the way in from Sheremetyevo Airport, you'll see the memorials to the furthest point which Hitler's armies reached, the suburbs of Moscow, as if they'd got to Uxbridge. That's as close as they got. This is a country which is nervous about having hostile alliances moving up to its frontier. If people would only understand that this is a natural reaction in a people that have suffered a lot from war, rather than trying to mix it up with their perfectly justified dislike of the Putin despotism and its disgusting corruption and tyranny and refusal to allow a large-scale dissent or proper opposition. If people would separate these two things, then they might recognize that actually, by pursuing this policy, we help the development of fanatical Russian nationalism. We get in the way of people trying to develop a free, law-governed country in Russia, which obviously we must all desire. We're not helping the cause of Russian freedom and democracy by this aggressive policy towards a country which actually offers no really particular threat, particularly to Britain.
No, indeed. And Joe Biden coming out with statements such as, I believe Vladimir Putin to be a killer, and he will soon find out what we're going to do about it. I mean, I don't even think that plays to his domestic audience anymore, does it? I don't think the Americans want any kind of conflict at this moment.
I don't mind him. It doesn't give me any difficulties people saying that Putin's regime is disgusting, and there is even if you set aside everything else, there are clear instances, particularly the Magnitsky case, in which the Russian state is directly implicated in the most disgraceful things. I don't mind if Mr. Biden wants to be rude to Mr. Putin. People often are, but it's his, if he then turns this into an aggressive, probing, poking foreign policy to a country which is sick with wounded pride and fears very much that its integrity is threatened, then all he will do, if people think Putin is bad, they should wait to see what they get if he's overthrown by the militant Russian nationalists who regard him as they do, as a softie. It's just not sensible to pursue this policy from anybody's point of view. The Democrats in Russia and those who favor the rule of law are not helped by being identified with Western powers, which many people in Russia see as a threat. We're not helping the cause we claim to be pursuing.
No, and you will know better than most people, having lived there, what the Russian psyche is, and it's a very different psyche, isn't it, from the general kind of Western European psyche?
Well, it has to be, for the reasons I mentioned. This is a country which has been repeatedly invaded by Sweden, by Poland, by Britain and France, by France again, by the Germans again, by the Golden Horde, one of the nicest streets in Moscow is called Bolshoi Ordinka, which means it's the street of the Golden Horde. It's called that because that's where the Golden Horde used to turn up every few years to collect their tribute. The Russian word for safety, bezopasnost, is a negative word. It means without danger. The default position of Russia is one of danger, and safety is only obtained when danger has been pushed away. That's an absolutely crucial difference between Russians and us. They know that they're vulnerable, and many of them have grandparents who experienced it, or don't have grandparents who were killed in it, and it does make a difference the way people regard foreign troops on there. We haven't got borders on which foreign troops can gather.
No.
Haven't got any. So how can we, nor has the United States. So we couldn't say the United States has got Mexico to the south and Canada to the north. It's got no worries. The neighbours that Russia faces are slightly more worrying.
No, I think that's right. Speaking of what some people would regard as foreign troops on British soil, what did you make of Mary Lou McDonald's apology? I mean, I don't even want to call it an apology. She's the leader.
I don't think it really counts, does it? I mean, it's a sort of attempt to try and sound less frightful than they have before. But I don't think that the IRA Army Council, which still, as far as I know, pretty much runs Sinn Fein. I don't think that they have any serious regrets about those things which they did, because after all, why should they? They gained huge advantages for themselves. They've got power and influence beyond their dreams in both parts of Ireland. And they also, Sinn Fein, their front organisation, has the almost unique ability in the British Isles to raise very large sums of money abroad in the United States, which is a huge danger to the Irish Republic, where I think it will help Sinn Féin supplant the democratic and peaceful parties. So, no, I don't. I'm sorry. Everything they ever say about these things is mealy and cool, and I'm not prepared to say that it's time they should be invited into the comity of proper democratic parties. Why should we do that?
No, but it is this world now, Peter, that we live in which people seem to want everyone to apologise for everything. In terms of, I mean, I see that the Joseph Rowntree Trust last week rounded up their own sort of circular firing squad and decided to turn it on themselves, because they worked out that Joseph Rowntree, despite the fact that they're an anti-racism charity, might well have had some links to slavery. And so they started to apologise. And I mean, actually, I've started thinking quite a lot about this. The act of apology has now become the default position. Anything you do, you must apologise for. You might have to apologise for something you haven't done, or something that you might do in the future. I find it quite sort of corrosive.
Well, it's cultural revolution and regime change, I'm afraid. It's every major institution in the country being compelled to undergo an inquisition and a reorganisation and a repurposing. As the whole of the British state and the whole of British culture, education, broadcasting, all the rest of it, is turned into something quite different from what it used to be. There are a few things still remaining in the past, but they're mostly symbolic. Kierkegaard's great warning was the most effective revolutions were the ones which left the buildings standing, but changed everything else. We are undergoing such a revolution, and this is really like the hauling down of the flag. We still have the Union Jack, but it doesn't mean what it used to mean. We still have the monarchy, it doesn't mean what it used to mean. We still have Parliament, but it isn't what it used to be. We still have supposedly independent courts, but they don't judge on the basis they used to judge on. We have schools which don't teach knowledge, but increasingly dogma. And this is all part of it. We are going through a slow motion revolution, as radical as any that any country has undergone, and this is part of it.
Yes, I think so. And I mean, there can't have been many more depressing sights this weekend, or any weekend, than the Queen sitting alone in a chapel with a mask on.
I did think it was extremely sad to watch. But one feels on these occasions a terrible, reasonable reluctance to say anything out loud much. This in the end is an individual grieving for the loss of her husband, a lifelong friend and support. Although the thing, one might find the thing disturbing and distressing, I just find it very difficult to say any more publicly than that, but precisely because of the private grief that one is inevitably going to intervene in if one gets to engage in it. So, I think a lot of us felt were saddened in more ways than one by what we saw on Saturday, but in the end, ultimately, I think one has one has to offer one's genuine condolences to somebody who's been terribly bruised.
Yes, I think so. I mean, we'll be talking about it coming up in the next hour, but there's also now talk of Prince Charles having a sort of summit meeting to discuss the future of the monarchy. Do you worry about the constitutional effect of all of this in the end?
I think that the current Queen maintains it's like one of those burial chambers in the pyramids where as soon as the air comes in, everything crumbles. As long as she's there, because of the personal respect and love that she commands, the monarchy is not really exposed to the modern world. But the moment has to come by the nature of things when she's no longer there, and at that point I think the whole monarchy will be questioned. I don't think that most people in this country anymore understand what it's for or how it works or value it or realize just how fortunate they are to have such a clever and intricate constitutional arrangement. I think there will be a great enthusiasm, particularly in Australia and then perhaps reflected back into this country for the end of the monarchy once we're into a new reign. And I fear it greatly. I can't see, given the general state of public opinion and education, I can't see it's going to be very easy to oppose that. And I fear a period of turmoil. Of course, that means more cultural revolution. If this country were to become a republic, then so many things would change. Almost every law and every rule and every way we do things is based upon it being a monarchy. If it became a republic, so many things would change. That at the end of it, it would be as if a hurricane had blown across the forest.
Well, I mean, I'm reminded, I suppose, today, because we're talking about it as well, this football story. I mean, football was lost to the general fan, I would say, probably 25 to 30 years ago. The idea that now politicians are jumping up and down because they're thinking of taking their money elsewhere is ridiculous. The same goes for the monarchy, I think. You know, if it doesn't indeed end in our lifetime, or perhaps shortly thereafter, I don't think we'd be surprised.
No, enormous forces are loose in the world, and some of them are resistible and some not. The difficulty is that most people don't recognize them when they see them. And indeed, anybody who stands up and points out the dangers of so many of the aspects of the modern world is often bulldozed aside by people who say, well, no, actually, I'm glad to have my building society demutualized because I get a large check. I'm glad to do this for the same reason that people are... Or why are you worried about the intrusiveness of the information which your phone carries about you? Think of the convenience that the phone gives you. People are constantly bamboozled into accepting major changes, which they might, if they looked into them, think were good. But on the other hand, if they paused and separated the benefits of them from the dangers of them, they might be more worried. But people are terribly inclined to be complacent and to believe that all will be for the best and the best of all possible worlds. And it so often is not. But it's very difficult being a dissenter in this, because not merely does nobody listen to you, but you also become, as I was discussing earlier, of the Russia business. Simply for dissenting, you become the target for being hosed down with great quantities of slime. There is an extraordinary intolerance of any kind of dissent. People seem to want to be happy about things which actually ought to be making them unhappy, or at the very least apprehensive and cautious.
Yes, quite. And also the other thing you notice when looking around the current sort of political and business landscape is there seems to be an awful lot of people making an awful lot of money because they're mates with somebody.
Well, I think that's always been the case. I think there was
Seems worse now, though, doesn't it?
Well, no, I think it's hard to measure. I think there was a huge reform in the Victorian era of this country, in which we became, by comparison with most places in the world, incredibly free of corruption. And when you consider either the United States or continental Europe, this country has a very good record of not being particularly corrupt. And I think that it's undoubtedly the nature of the way things are done now is undermining that. But yeah, it is bad. What I often say about this is that the whole. Why is it that politicians who were terrible and did awful things and made grave mistakes are only ever brought down by accusations of sleaze? Because all that happens when a politician is brought down by accusations of sleaze is that he or she is removed from public life and ceases to function. But the ideas and also the origins of these people, the strange nurseries, such as the Oxford School of Philosophy, Politics and Economics, where these idiots are produced, continue to churn out the same idiots who then come along and rule us badly again, and then again overthrown by sleaze, but then are replaced by people just like themselves. I would like to see politicians removed because they're bad at their jobs. I think David Cameron should have been drummed out of public life for his disastrous war in Libya, which did so much damage, not just to Libya, but to the whole of the European continent and Africa as well. That it's incalculable. It was the most stupid, vainglorious mistake, and yet he still gets away with it, whereas Blair is at least now rightly excoriated for his Iraq performance. Cameron's blunder in Libya is almost completely forgotten. That's what he should have been got rid of.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. We're still seeing the fallout from all of that as well, of course, here in the form of people coming to this country from those parts of the world. Peter, great to talk to you as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens,